Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. Today I'm really excited to introduce you to Ruth Whiteside, and she is coming to us from clan.org. We'll have her social media and website information below, but she is involved with work about adverse childhood difficulties, which I think is a really important topic. She's worked in schools for over 20 years and 12 years in a leadership position, and then she went on to do other work, coaching and mentoring teachers with a focus on building resilience and emotional intelligence. So she's provided lots of care and training and opportunities around emotional and behavioral difficulties, especially with primary school children. So the book, there's a book that we have the information about called Adverse Childhood Experiences, Why All the Fuss. That is from her organization, I think, that she's working with. I just want to say welcome, Ruth, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is great.
So, adverse childhood experiences, tell us, first of all, just explain what that means for people who haven't heard the term before.
Okay. Adverse childhood experiences is the name given to a group of experiences that are classified as adverse for children in childhood. So it includes things like emotional and physical neglect, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. It also involves kind of family members. So it might be that a primary caregiver is addicted to substances, both legal and illegal, that there might be a mental health issue with a primary caregiver, that maybe one of the parents or primary caregivers is in prison. So it kind of gives a label to the kinds of things that we now know have a huge impact on sort of development, brain development, healthy attachment.
Right, definitely. So, I know you're very interested in a lot of your work is about intergenerational effects in this area. So tell us about how that works and what happens.
I think what happens is, although we know from research that ACEs is not purely a socio-economic issue, we do find it in those sort of urban deprived areas more than in others. And what that means is that if I think we tend to talk about sort of ACEs, but we also need to talk about community ACEs, adverse community environments, in terms of how they impact on children. So if you're living in an urban deprived area where perhaps there are no services available, there are no local shops, no access to surgeries, to dentists, to swimming pools, to parks that are well maintained and safe to go to, that in and of itself is an adverse community experience. If you're living in an area where perhaps there's a high level of crime related to poverty, if there's a higher level of violence on the streets, casual violence, deliberate violence, you can see how that has an impact on the family. And as children grow up within that setting, it becomes very difficult for them to see anything else beyond that, and so the cycle continues. And I think my real area of interest is identifying those families who are vulnerable and finding ways to support them so that we can try and break that cycle of intergenerational ACEs.
Yeah, so it's such an important topic, and as you said, it's the whole community or the whole family that's often involved in this. So can you tell us, Ruth, that maybe for teachers watching or for parents watching, what are some of the tools that we can use to help manage these pieces?
Okay, I think the key tool really is communication, talking to one another. I think that's absolutely key. And I do a lot of work around emotional intelligence. I do a lot of work with 6 Seconds, who are do a lot of work in various diverse communities around the world. And in doing that work with 6 Seconds and understanding how we use EQ, it just brings it home to me even more how important communication is, and communication and developing mindful practice. Mindful practice in terms of simply recognizing in the here and now how you are feeling, and then being able to take steps to address that, or to take steps to continue to feel positive. And I think, to me, it's all inextricably linked. You can't take one away from the other. I think if you have a greater understanding of how you are and how you are in yourself and how you deal with the difficulties that life throws at you, then you're going to be much more able to develop practice to combat the stuff that life throws at you. And if you can do that for yourself, then you're going to be much more likely, I feel, to be able to model that implicitly and explicitly to your own children, to the children around you, to the children in your class. So for me, I think being mindful, I'm not talking here about a specific practice whereby we sit down at the end of every day in our classrooms. I'm talking about being mindful in terms of feeling that sense of self, and being able to anchor yourself. So when things are really difficult, you have the tools and strategies to employ mindfulness, to think, okay, let's just take a step back here. Let's not hurtle towards crisis point. Let's see if we can backpedal. I think for teachers, this is really, really important. Teachers, I think, particularly in the UK, we have such a difficult education system in England and Wales in terms of just the sheer amount of initiatives, the data-driven aspect. And it takes away a lot of teacher autonomy, and it takes away a lot of time to spend with children talking about the stuff that really matters. We spend all of our time worrying about whether or not they can do the multiplication tables. And I think it's really important that we spend time talking with children, exploring difficult issues, developing an emotional language, and being able to use mindfulness as a way to self-soothe, self-regulate. In terms of parents, I've been working with parents recently, and we've been talking about mindfulness. The classic thing, some of our parents get very stressed if their toddler has a tantrum. And as soon as they understand what's happening in the child's brain when they're having that tantrum, as soon as they recognise that it's not something they've done or haven't done, that it's actually a developmentally appropriate point in time, that releases a sense of shame, embarrassment for the parent, and allows them to be more mindful and think, it's fine, it's okay. This is what happens. This is not me. It's not my parenting. It's, and not worry so much about people who might be watching and thinking, oh, look at that child, look at the way they're behaving. Because that's a massive issue, I think, for parents, especially vulnerable parents who maybe don't talk to other parents or don't have access to other parents or support. So I think there's a lot of I feel mindfulness is incredibly important, even if it is literally just stopping what you're doing and just reflecting for that brief moment and understanding, okay, there are options open to me. It's too easy to kind of go off on automatic pilot and react to situations without taking that tiny amount of time just to think, what are the options open? As soon as we can start to assess our options and choose, then that gives us a whole amount more of energy and sense of control over our own destiny, if you like. So I think I've rambled. That's quite a long answer. It's quite a short question.
No, that was really great, very informative. And I think, what you said is really important about embodying mindfulness and kind of those mindful moments throughout the day rather than thinking that you have some specific practice. So for parents, maybe of young children, what kind of support is available, or what would you suggest for them? Like, where should they start if they're interested in learning more? I know you have this book from your organization, but I'm not sure if that's for parents or more for professionals.
Yeah, well, the book that we wrote is mostly for professionals, in the sense that it gives a picture of the impact of adverse childhood experiences in the northeast of England, particularly. And it's full of facts and full of quite grim data, which you wouldn't want to be kind of passing on to parents. But there's a whole raft of books out there which I think are really useful. And my personal favourite is The Whole Brain Child by, yes, you know the one I'm talking about.
Dan Siegel, he's on this summit as well.
Dan Siegel, yes. Oh, yes, of course you have, and I think that's a superb book. And actually, I spoke about some of the concepts in that book with parents that I was working with, because I think for parents who haven't got access to support, or don't know how to ask for help, or who are particularly vulnerable and get kind of caught up in the day-to-day stuff of life, if they're just given time to understand how the brain works, then it just allows them the opportunity to think, okay, that's fine then. This is not a problem. It's not an issue for me. This is not a child who is presenting me with difficulties or challenging behaviour. This is toddler tantrums at its most, volatile, but isn't actually a problem. And I think, for those parents who are vulnerable, and for teachers who are struggling in the classroom, when they see children with some challenging behaviours, and I'm thinking some particularly young children, there is that overwhelming sense sometimes, I think, to think there must be a reason for it. There must be some sort of pathological reason. We need to get the experts involved. We need to get them diagnosed with ASD or attention deficit disorder. And I think sometimes we just need to take a step back and think, okay, we're talking left brain, right brain, and how they integrate, and and where are those children operating at that moment in time when they're displaying challenging behaviour, and thinking, okay, that's normal. It's a pain in the butt to deal with as a parent and as a teacher, but it's normal. That kids do the right side of the brain develops first, and so you end up with that big emotional reaction to things, and it's the left side of the brain that allows them later, as they grow, to start to apply logic and reason. And if you've ever reasoned with a 3-year-old, you'll know it's absolutely impossible. But at a certain point in time, their left brain starts to really kick in, and suddenly you can have a reasoned conversation, and the tantrums that we're so used to in early childhood disappear. Right. So I think it's having knowledge. Knowledge, I think, is really powerful for parents and for teachers. And if they have an understanding of why children behave as they do, then they can take the appropriate steps to support their child or the child in the classroom more appropriately.
Yeah, so I think, you've raised so many important issues. I think also agree that book is a great book for parents and teachers. And I think it's so important for teachers also to learn more about children's brains and how they work. And I would hope that more and more of that would come into teacher training, so that, as you said, you don't automatically think this is a huge issue. It might just be some type of communication, as you mentioned at the beginning. And so really, really interesting. So tell us a little bit about building resilience then in these families that have ACEs, or the communities that have it. What are some of the ways that your organization or your work goes about helping develop that?
Okay, well, one of the ways we do it is we work with teachers, and we work with teachers using kind of the 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence. To start working on teachers first, because until teachers are aware of what makes them tick and how they show up in the classroom every day, then I don't think they are always that well equipped to then work with the children in developing resilience. I think teachers themselves need to be able to model both implicitly and explicitly what resilience looks like. If you're not feeling very resilient in the classroom, you're not going to show that. So, so I think that's kind of our first prong, if you like. Working with children themselves, it's about investigating the things that help to develop inner resilience. So, for those families who are have experienced adverse childhood, experienced adversity, it's about looking at how they cope with those complex feelings. So it's about developing a resilience so that when they start to feel overwhelmed with those issues and emotions, that they can combat them. And it's things like gratitude, and it feels very glib for me to say, but there's various organisations, 30 days of gratitude and all the rest of it. But if you have people who are able to identify what they are grateful for, then they will be developing that inner resilience, because they know there is something there that's theirs, that's for them, that they are grateful for, and they can implicitly model what it is to be grateful, if that makes sense. I think for us, one of the key tenets, key premises is, if you can encourage children and adults, in fact, to be kind, explicitly kind. If you think about a young child who perhaps has experienced adversity, who comes to school and is really kind of lacking in social and emotional intelligence, if you like, and they're really struggling to make relationships and connections, those are the children who need to be implicitly taught and explicitly taught how to be kind. And those are the children who, the more they are kind and the more that is recognised by the adults who are caring for them, and that recognition is passed on to that child then develops that inner resilience, because they know they are kind people. And it's about developing that sense of self, that sense of self-worth, the understanding that actually I am kind, I am a kind person. And in being kind, that kind of generates more kindness. And then that child becomes the model for other children, and the ripples just keep on rippling out. Being brave, we talk to children about being brave. As teachers in the classroom, as parents, we forget what it's like to do things for the first time. But kids, they're always doing things for the first time. And it requires, bravery. A resilient child will maybe just happily go off and jump from the sixth stair on the flight of stairs to the floor. Go, woohoo! Some children will not feel confident to even jump from the bottom step. And it's thinking, well, if you can encourage children to feel like I can have a go, I can try, I can be brave, then they're more likely to try the new things and explore the world around them, and not be afraid of their own shadows. We often see with very children who have very little resilience that they are quite timid, that they're not confident, they don't talk to other people or other children, they don't share. And I think that's the kind of thing that we kind of, our organisation and through 6 seconds, this notion that we develop that sense of self, and in developing that sense of self, that develops that inner resilience, so that hopefully you can draw on internal resources in terms of your resilience, and you can draw on external resources. So it might be you have a good friendship group, it might be your choir group on a Wednesday night who you go to in times of need, but within your internal resources are the resources that allow you to know that you're a good person, you're a kind person, you can cope with this. It's tough, but you can do it. So it's those kinds of things that we work with teachers and families to think about. Those, they seem like such little things, and yet they have such power, because it's about human connection, human relationships, not being afraid to talk about how you're feeling, give children more emotional language that they can use. And it all feeds into that sense of, who you are, where where your role in the world, your place in the world, and how you use that to move forwards.
Yeah. I love the work about gratitude and kindness, and I'm a big proponent of that as well, especially with young preschool children, and just developing that from the start. Really, I think it's so important. So that's really wonderful. The work that you're doing. I wondered if you could just maybe talk a little bit about 6 seconds. I was also trained in emotional intelligence with 6 seconds, so might be interesting for some of the teachers and the parents to hear about.
I think for me, my journey with 6 seconds started about 2 years ago, and I've always been interested in emotional intelligence, and when I did my master's in education at Newcastle University, a lot of the work I did and reading around that I did was around emotional intelligence, and the understanding, the recognition that as teachers, all adults, but I'm thinking about teachers particularly. Teachers have so many unconscious biases, and if they're not aware of those, clearly they wouldn't be being unconscious, but if they're not aware of them, that does potentially have an impact on what they do in the classroom. So, and I'm talking here about the teacher who says of a child in the class, well, I'm not going to worry about little Johnny because he's never going to get there. He's never going to make that progress that we need. So I'm not going to include him in my targets because, well, look at the family he comes from.
Right.
And there are teachers who still talk like that, and it breaks my heart. Absolutely, and it breaks my heart because this is a child who is entitled to the same curriculum as everybody else, and who really needs more of that teacher's support. So when I left my teaching career to do what I do now, for me it was all about looking at teachers' unconscious bias through using the 6 seconds materials, and coaching teachers in how to unpick their unconscious biases so that perhaps they were much better, much more effective in the classroom. And the 6 seconds materials, I mean, what I love about them is you do your online questionnaire, and depending on what you're looking for, you will have a specific type of report. And as a coach, I use those reports with the teachers, and we look at, we're always looking from a point of strength, because you can't go into coaching and say, well, you can't do this, you need to develop that. That doesn't work. So we're always looking at a position of strength, and looking at how those strengths can leverage some of the areas where perhaps we need to be working on, in terms of teachers' attitudes, teachers' unconscious biases, their feelings about some of the families they work with, some of the parents, the language they use in the classroom, and the language they use to describe people and children. I'm a big advocate of thinking carefully about the language that you use. So, teachers discussing a family at lunchtime in the class, in the staff room, they need to be mindful of what are the words they're using at all times, because it's the least they can do for that family. And it's about taking them away from that judgmental position and thinking, what do they need? And that's something that comes through in the 6 seconds approach, which is all about thinking, what do we need to be more effective, to be kinder, to be more grateful, to be more productive, to be smarter. It's all about looking for opportunities. And that's why I just love the 6 second stuff. I think it's been really useful to me to be certified as a coach using 6 seconds materials, and now working with teachers using those materials, and working the leadership teams in schools using the materials. It's absolutely fantastic, because it gives such a clear direction should they wish to take it. Obviously, I can go so far with them, they have to then do the hard work of changing the situation. But I really rate the 6 seconds materials, because I think it's very helpful. And I actually worked with a colleague from the company, CLAD, the other day, he has been a bit of a cynic about emotional intelligence and, you know, the emphasis that I place on emotional intelligence. So I asked him to do the 6 seconds diagnostic.
Right.
And then we did the debriefing, and we actually did the debriefing as a podcast. Because he sprung this on me. I was thinking, we can't do it as a podcast, but actually we did, and it worked really well. But what I think was so interesting, as we went through the reports with my colleague Al, and we talked about what it meant and how that might impact on his life and what he did, you know, as a general rule of thumb. Yeah. By the end, you could just see that he had just changed, and he was thinking, okay, I can see why this is really useful. So he's now looking at so thinking about how he can become certified as 6 seconds, so that he can then use it with his social work students.
Right.
Because it's such an important, he recognises such an important way for unpicking the very core of you, and then using that to extend that to other people.
Yeah, it's a great company, and they do lots of amazing work with all kinds of people, but a lot in schools and with teachers as well. So we'll put the link to them as well, so you can check them out. But I just want to say thank you, Ruth, so much for joining us and sharing all that very interesting, informative information, and some strategies in there as well for teachers and parents. And as I mentioned, we'll have all Ruth's social media and all the different websites that she's mentioned, and the book that she collaborated on in her speaker bio. So thank you so much again for sharing your time and your ideas with us today.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thanks.